Henry Ford's first Model T was built to run on hemp gasoline, and the car itself was constructed from hemp. On his large estate, Ford was photographed among his hemp fields. The car, grown from the soil, had hemp plastic panels whose impact strength was 10 times stronger than steel. Henry Ford ran 40,000 vehicles on hemp fuel from only 10,000 acres. The emissions are what you exhale, and the next year's crop reconverts it back into oxygen. That's a natural cycle fuel. We think that our ethanol and biofuels and flex fuel systems are all the cutting edge, but biofuel development, of course, is nothing new. Way back in the 1930s, Henry Ford was hard at work in the alternative fuel sector, and in 1941 he constructed a hemp-fueled and hemp-bodied prototype car. The plastic body panels were composed of 70% cellulose fibers, including industrial strength, mixed with a resin binder, and apparently they were pretty sturdy. A guy beats on the trunk with an axe and it fails to leave a mark. Industrial hemp won't make you high. It has no THC in it, but its association with marijuana has historically been a major legal stumbling block. There's some of you that think I'm full of shit, but the actual footage of 1941 should be proof enough for you.
Amongst the thousands of products made from hemp, one of the most extraordinary is Henry Ford's plastic car. Built in 1941, it contained cellulose fibers derived from hemp, sisal, and wheat straw. The plastic was lighter than steel, yet could withstand 10 times the impact without denting.
Would you believe that marijuana could replace most oil and energy needs? That marijuana could revolutionize the textile industry and stop foreign imports? Those are the claims. Some people think marijuana, or hemp, may be the epitome of Yankee ingenuity. Mr. Jack Harrer, for example, is the national director and founder of an organization called Hemp. It's an acronym for Help End Marijuana Prohibition, located in Van Nuys, California. Mr. Harrer is the author of a remarkable little book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes, wherein, not surprisingly, Mr. Harrer urges the repeal of marijuana prohibition. Mr. Harrer is not alone. Throughout the war on drugs, several organizations have consistently urged the legalization of marijuana. High Times Magazine, for example, the National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws, or NORML for short, and an organization called BAC, the Business Alliance for Commerce in Hemp. But the reasons the pro-marijuana lobby want marijuana legal has little to do with getting high, and a great deal to do with fighting oil giants like Saddam Hussein, Exxon, and Iran. The pro-marijuana groups claim that hemp is such a versatile raw material that its products not only compete with petroleum, but with coal, natural gas, nuclear energy, pharmaceutical, timber, and textile companies. It is estimated that methane and methanol production alone from hemp grown as biomass could replace 90% of the world's energy needs. If they are right, this is not good news for oil interests and could account for the continuation of marijuana prohibition. The claim is that the threat hemp posed to natural resource companies back in the 30s accounts for its original ban. At one time, marijuana seemed to have a promising future as a cornerstone of industry. When Rudolf Diesel produced his famous engine in 1896, he assumed that the diesel engine would be powered by a variety of fuels, especially vegetable and seed oils. Rudolf Diesel, like most engineers then, believed vegetable fuels were superior to petroleum. Hemp is the most efficient vegetable. Hemp paper contains no dioxin or other toxic residue, and a single acre of hemp can produce the same amount of paper as 4 acres of trees. The trees take 20 years to harvest, and hemp takes a single season. In warm climates, hemp can be harvested 2, even 3 times a year. It also grows in bad soil and restores the nutrients. Hemp fiber stripping machines were bad news to the Hearst Paper Manufacturing Division and a host of other natural resource firms. Coincidentally, the DuPont Chemical Company had, in 1937, been granted a patent on a sulfuric acid process to make paper from wood pulp. At the time, DuPont predicted their sulfuric acid process would account for 80% of their business for the next 50 years. Hemp, once the mainstay of American agriculture, became a threat to a handful of corporate giants. To stifle the commercial threat that hemp posed to timber interests, William Randolph Hearst began referring to hemp in his newspapers by its Spanish name, marijuana. This did two things. It associated the plant with Mexicans and played on racist fears, and it misled the public into thinking that marijuana and hemp were different plants. Nobody was afraid of hemp. It had been cultivated and processed into usable goods and consumed as medicine and burned in oil lamps for hundreds of years. But after a campaign to discredit hemp in the Hearst newspapers, Americans became afraid of something called marijuana. By 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, which marked the beginning of the end of the hemp industry. In 1938, Popular Mechanics ran an article about marijuana called New Billion-Dollar Crop. It was the first time the words billion-dollar were used to describe a U.S. agricultural product. Popular Mechanics said, and I'm quoting, "A machine has been invented which solves a problem more than 6,000 years old. The machine is designed to remove the fiber-bearing cortex from the rest of the stalk, making hemp fiber available for use without a prohibitive amount of human labor. Hemp is the standard fiber of the world. It has great tensile strength and durability. It is used to produce more than 5,000 textile products, ranging from rope to fine laces. And the woody herds remaining after the fiber has been removed contain more than 77% cellulose and can be used to produce more than 25,000 products, ranging from dynamite to cellophane." End of quote. Well, since the Popular Mechanics article appeared over half a century ago, many more applications have come to light. But back in 1935, more than 58,000 tons of marijuana seed were used just to make paint and varnish, all non-toxic, by the way. When marijuana was banned, these safe paints and varnishes were replaced by paints made with toxic petrochemicals. In the 1930s, no one knew about poisoned rivers or deadly landfills or children dying from chemicals in house paint. People did know something about hemp back then because the plant and its products were so common. Today, many of these items are made in whole or in part with synthetic petrochemicals and wood. All oil lamps used to burn hemp seed oil until the whale oil edged it out of first place in the mid-19th century. And then, when all the whales were dead, lamp lights were fueled by petroleum and coal and recently radioactive energy. This may be hard to believe in the middle of a war on drugs, but the first law concerning marijuana in the colonies at Jamestown in 1619 ordered farmers to grow Indian hemp. Massachusetts passed a compulsory grow law in 1631. Connecticut followed in 1632. The Chesapeake colonies ordered their farmers by law to grow marijuana in the mid-18th century. Names like Hempstead or Hemp Hill dot the American landscape and reflect areas of intense marijuana cultivation. During World War II, domestic hemp production became crucial when the Japanese cut off Asian supplies to the U.S. American farmers, even their sons who grew marijuana, were exempt from military duty during World War II. A 1942 U.S. Department of Agriculture film called Hemp for Victory extolled the agricultural might of marijuana and called for hundreds of thousands of acres to be planted. Despite a rather vigorous drug crackdown, 4-H clubs were asked by the government to grow marijuana for seed supply. Ironically, war plunged the government into a sober reality about marijuana, and that is that it's very valuable. In today's anti-drug climate, people don't want to hear about the commercial potential of marijuana. The reason is that the flowering top of a female hemp plant contains a drug. But from 1842 through the 1890s, a powerful concentrated extract of marijuana was the second most prescribed drug in the United States. In all that time, the medical literature didn't list any of the ill effects claimed by today's drug warriors.
Imagine a world we could live in, plant these seeds in the minds of our children, plant these trees and grow a solution. Hemp can heal the world. Imagine a world we could live in, plant these seeds in the minds of our children, plant these trees and grow a solution. Hemp can save the world.
It's legal in some of the countries to grow hemp for fiber. And in France, this woman whose name is France Perrier, Madame France Perrier, she builds about 300 houses a year using hemp and cement lime, and she makes a thing called isocyanver. And she mixes the lime with hemp herbs, the leftover parts of the hemp plant after the fiber's been extracted. And hemp does this amazing thing. It turns to stone, it petrifies. And so when you mix the lime and hemp herbs together, you get something stronger than cement at 1/6 the weight.
The Now House Institute's prototype carbon neutral building. One of the main components of this building is hempcrete. I'm standing in front of a hempcrete wall. What hempcrete is industrial hemp. The core of the stalk of an industrial hemp plant is called shiv. It's a woody fiber, and it's mixed with a lime-based binder to make an insulation material that you can build walls or roofs with. The reason that we're using it, and I think it's interesting in terms of the whole hemp debate, I think this is the best wall system in the world. So I'm all about hemp. I think hemp's an important thing to push because it's food, fiber, building material. But really, I'm choosing this material because it's the best in terms of building science. And why is that true? First of all, because this is what's often called a breathable wall system. And I don't mean breathable for air. We're actually building an airtight wall, but it's breathable for water. And why is that an advantage? Well, in a typical wall, you have a cavity that you seal tightly and then you fill with insulation. Well, water will get inside that cavity because water that's its job in the world. My body is 70% water. The surface of the planet, I think, is 70% water. It gets everywhere. It can climb uphill. It's through capillary action. It can dissolve any material. Anyway, so what we want to do in a building is create a wall that welcomes water but doesn't rot when it lets the water in, and that's exactly what hempcrete does. When humidity changes in the air outside, the wall can take on that extra humidity and hold it until the humidity drops outside, and then it'll let it back out. In the meantime, because the lime is wrapped around the cellulose won't rot. So therefore, we have a wall that can adjust naturally to humidity levels without rotting. That means that this wall will last a very long time. It also means that indoor air quality is going to be much improved. Now we're on the inside of the building. We were talking about the breathable qualities of hempcrete. This is a hempcrete wall with a scratch coat of earth plaster. This is actually a plaster that we made on site with just clay, subsoil, and sand we mixed together. This is another great quality of a hempcrete wall that we're able to plaster directly onto without plywoods, drywalls, laths, drainage planes. It's simply the material itself, the insulation itself can be plastered. That saves us a lot of steps, a lot of time and money. And also it allows us to create this breathable wall I was talking about. So now we have the hempcrete interior, which is permeable to water vapor, as I was saying, and then we plaster it with either a lime or an earth plaster, which is also permeable. So then the surface, which is going to be, and the interior, of course, it's your protection against crayons and whatever else is happening inside, and the outside is protection against liquid water. Those things have the same permeability to water vapor as the hempcrete itself. So therefore, we're in the inside of the building. Let's say you're in a shower, or let's say that this is the kitchen, and there's water vapor in the air. The wall will take that on and hold it until the interior relative humidity goes down, and then it'll let it back out. So we basically are creating a stable interior relative humidity with a passive material, just with a wall material. So that's a huge advantage of hempcrete. It's basically, in the simplest way of saying it, it's a healthier wall. So we said it's a longer lasting wall because it deals with water well. It's also a healthier wall because it deals with water well. Another advantage of hempcrete is that it's carbon sequestering. You remember before I said that our goal is to be carbon neutral. Well, hempcrete actually sequesters carbon. Let me tell you how it does that. First of all, any cellulose material, wood for example, or hemp, takes carbon in during its life cycle, and usually when it decays, it lets it back into the atmosphere. If you take that plant and then put it into a wall, for example in hempcrete, then that carbon is now sequestered in the wall and not becoming part of climate change. So the hempcrete in this building, this one building alone, will sequester 20,000 pounds of carbon. That's a pretty big accomplishment, and it's all thanks to hempcrete. Hempcrete is part of the natural building world. What are natural materials? They're basically materials that are usually local or site harvested or have low embodied energy like hempcrete does. They're also materials that work well with the site. And one thing that's great about hempcrete is that you can create a strong wall of different thicknesses based on what your insulation needs are. That's because you use forms around some kind of other structure like wood that will hold up the roof, and then you form around that and put the hempcrete in the cavity. So for example, in our house here, the Now House prototype, since we're trying to get to such high energy efficiency levels, we have a 16-inch thick wall to get us a performance rating of R40. We could also do a 10-inch wall. So we have flexibility in terms of the amount of insulation that we're going to use with the exact same procedure for construction. That's fairly unique in the world, and it's another reason why hempcrete's a really great product.
Imagine a world we could live in. Plant these seeds in the minds of our children. Plant these trees and grow a solution. Hemp can heal the world. Imagine a world we could live in. Plant these seeds in the minds of our children. Plant these trees and grow a solution. Hemp can save the world.
A few years ago I set up a company called HAB, Happiness, Architecture, Beauty, as a development company. And we're finishing this scheme in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. It's a scheme of about 42 homes called The Triangle, and designed by a wonderful award-winning British architect, Glenn Howells. My great difficulty is that every new scheme we're building 7 now. I look at the range of materials out there. I cannot find one to match hemp. I can't find one that has such a low embodied energy, that locks carbon in, that has such a low environmental impact, that can be grown locally and harvested with minimum inputs in a matter of just a few months. It's an incredibly expedient building method. Every other system I looked at involves a skin and a structure and an insulation, and then you're worrying about where the thermal mass goes, and I cannot find a material which does what hemp does. We made a television series about this project, and we went off and planted a field of hemp, and over 12 to 14 weeks watched it grow to 4 meters tall. And that was next to a power station, which was rather neat. So, and the trains went by and the motorway went by, and you saw the plumes of smoke coming out of the chimneys of the power station. You thought, this field of hemp is absorbing all the CO2 and dirt, and we're going to build houses with it. So for me, there's a tremendous excitement in the pioneering notion of using this material. The project manager here on site said to me he loved the material because we had this lorry reversing on site, a big cement mixing lorry. Instead of pouring out heavy, wet, toxic, caustic concrete, it would instead pour out this sort of fluffy, lightweight stuff that looks like sawdust. It didn't require any power tools. So all we had was buckets and barrows and blokes. And because there are no power tools, there are no cables everywhere. And it actually makes for a very, very healthy, very safe building site, hemp. It's a very, very builder-friendly material. I mean, it's a no-brainer.